us tonight, a dramatic showdown on the floor of the House of Representatives has reopened one of the most sensitive questions in Nigeria's democracy: how election results are transmitted and who controls that process. The House was thrown into a rowdy session after an attempt to rescind the Electoral Act Amendment Bill 2025. The chairman of the Committee on Rules and Business invoked Order 9 of the House Standing Orders, arguing the bill needed to be revisited to reflect emerging electoral reforms. The proposal sought to recommit the legislation for fresh consideration. But when the motion was put to a voice vote by the Speaker, Abbas Tajuddin, the majority rejected it. What followed was open protests, shouting on the floor, and ultimately a retreat into a closed-door executive session, despite objections from some lawmakers.
Where there is successful transmission, the transmitted result shall have the same effect with the physical from EC8A. That's all Nigerians are asking for.
Well, that certainly fits the description of a rowdy session, doesn't it? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought and Arise News analyst, Dr. Sam Amadi, and the legislative consultant and public policy analyst, Dr. Chibuzo Okereke. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Great to see you, Dr. Amadi. You haven't sat in this chair with me for a long time, so it really is nice to see you. Chibuzo, of course, is an old regular on this program, but thank you to both of you. What we witnessed on the House floor, was that routine legislative consideration or a red flag moment for Nigeria's electoral reform process?
Okay, two things on procedure. I mean, you've said this is rowdy session. We've seen rowdy sessions across the world, but there's some coherence about rowdy sessions. So, but this looks like people in the motor park agitated. That's not, it doesn't speak well. But again, this National Assembly has been, distinguished in deviating from norms. So I used to be a special advisor to Senate President on strategy and understand what goes on. At this level, where there's discrepancy between two houses' passage, this bill has been passed. What they expect as reconciliation is either or. So they choose this version or that version. And then on a return date, they will return and they vote, and that's gone. Okay. But of course, the Constitution allows them to self-regulate, and so their orders may be out of form. But again, there's something anomalous about passing your own version after due process, after first, second reading, passage, committee stage, you pass, they pass a different one, and people now come back to change it. So the procedure they've been adopted, and that also speaks to the one we had with the declaration of state of emergency, where they couldn't use the normal, process, and then they passed it wrongly as well. We've seen these deviations, and they suggest a politics of desperation, and politics is always desperate. I mean, even in the U.S., you see people want to get political outcome, and in policy school, what they teach us, what they call the prospective and retrospective model of law. So the judges follow logic, not partisanship.
Indeed.
But the Congress,
they're supposed to.
Right. Congress is a political branch, or the National Assembly. So there's nothing really wrong about legislators trying to legislate to drive strategic political ends. But the procedure matters. And ultimately, the test will now be, are they responsive to what the people feel? And that's why, no matter how the dispute about what's democracy ends up classically as responsiveness to citizens.
Indeed.
And that's what is missing in what has been playing out so far.
Dr. Chibuzo Okereke, I wonder what your thoughts are on that. You're a bit of a legislative expert, and every time we have issues at the National Assembly, we drag you in here, and are always the beneficiaries of your considerable knowledge about these things. The bill had already been passed, as Dr. Amadi said. How common and how appropriate is it to attempt to rescind a major electoral amendment at this stage?
Well, I think it's a normal legislative procedure, but of course it's mixed up with politics. I think they were trying to, through the back door, undermine the conference committee that had already been set up. And that is what, maybe the conference committee, they met yesterday, we don't know the issues they had. Maybe they were not able to turn in a harmonized report. But apparently, certain majority party wants the version of the Senate to be the order of the day. So when the committee chairman on rules have removed that substantive motion for the House to rescind a decision on that clause 63, it was to the fact that it becomes the same version as passed by the Senate, in which case it wouldn't require any conference committee to harmonize anything, and that was what brought about the uproar that ensued.
And we heard them yelling, APC Ole, which I think in Europe means APC thief.
Yeah.
What exactly was that all about?
So it's about legislative intelligence and sagacity. It's obvious that the minority party has been playing to the gallery all this while, thinking that they could manage their way, look for their own interests. At the time, the minority caucus is needed the most. They were in complete disarray. No strategy, no legislative intelligence. There was no plan to engage. Because if you had the intelligence that there was going to be a substantive motion to receive a decision to adopt a Senate version, because recommittal of versions or clauses of a bill is in line with legislative procedure. So, but to have that intelligence that some group of people are planning to do this and have your own strategy to deal with that. Because if you look at the institutional design of the legislature, you have the majority and the minority. You don't have that in the Federal Executive Council. So if you are in the minority party, you're expected to have a strategy to engage. And that kind of strategy that will bring you results. We definitely didn't say that. And then that was why the presiding officer had to proceed. But I see a total breach of procedure, because in line with the standing orders, once there is a point of order being raised, the presiding officer must pause and listen to that point of order. You can either overrule or sustain. Not is noted. The noted verdict of a point of order doesn't exist in legislative practice. I think they just introduced that. So that was the challenges that we faced.
Okay, and Dr. Amadi, the justification given was the need to reflect emerging electoral reforms. I don't know what in thundering tarnation that means, but what could that, from your assessment, because you do much better assessments than most, what would that realistically mean? Does this suggest lawmakers identified genuine technical flaws or political discomfort with mandatory electronic transmission?
Okay, so this is how it works. The process of lawmaking in Nigeria, the rules don't allow for deliberation. Oftentimes, they forget that this is a deliberator's house. So you rarely see somebody come with charts, like you see. This kind of bill. Now, if they, let's forget the end. They don't want electronic transmission. So let's assume political legitimate, that's an interest. But how do you convey that? So you look for research. First, the notion around extensity of telecom should have come in a formal way. In 2023, it was 92 or 97% coverage. So you have to find a reason, an argument, and make it in a robust, convincing way. That's why it's called deliberation. So people can disagree on the votes, what you want to vote, but they understand it. Now, what they tend to convey is a sense that there's something, a national interest here. And if you listen to what I say, it's a sense of there could be a failure, but they're not able to define clearly what that failure is. And the tragedy in all these conversations is that the INEC, both the Electoral Act they are trying to amend, have provided for when there is a crisis they're talking about, failure of transmission. If you go to, for example, section 64, Clause 94 of the regulation, they are well provided. So there is no intelligibility around the copping out. But what is clear is that if transmission is made conditional, optional, the default mode will be failure, not using it could become legitimized. And so the outcome they wanted was that outcome. But the presentation didn't quite, you see, democracy is about discourse, it's about public reason. The results of deliberation might be suboptimal. But the critical thing about democracy is that people meet others in good faith, provide reasons others could accept or reject. So the whole, process was basically like pull the chestnut out of fire. And for us, the chestnut is we don't want the level of transparency where human mediation will be out of it. So first, it has created a problem of legitimacy now. And secondly, it has further damaged public confidence in the electoral system because already about less than 25%. And some people are watching this drama and they figure out that, look, these guys really just they don't want free and fair election. So my worry is, first, it's unintelligible. The discourse doesn't show, honorable members who are prepared with argument. Maybe there's some strategic argument to make to allow for that caveat. But nobody has made it out in a convincing, coherent manner. And then again, it's the fact that they're even willing to shut down Procedural, tear gas protesters, model their own legislative process, not even willing to take point of order, not even willing to wait and listen to what they will say, and just really want to close the deal and shut it down. Further, I watch people in the embassy watching this show, they will say, well, this country is not on the road to democracy at all. That's what they will say.
Well, I wonder what you think, Dr. Okereke, and more importantly, for our audience, where do things stand at the moment?
So I think the National Assembly needs to be more critical. If we watch the 2022 Act, when they made the provision on indirect election and requesting that 3-man delegates be elected, they thought they were trying to control the governors at the state who always stop them from returning to National Assembly. But they didn't even know where those 3-man delegates came from. And we started recording the highest turnover from even primary election. With what they are doing now, we are going to, in the House, we had about 80% turnover, Senate about 80-something%. In this 10th Assembly, we may be hitting 90-95% rate of legislators turnover in the 11th Assembly with what is going on now. Because, you see, you may think that you are so wise and that you have legislated for some kind of failure that will happen and expect that somebody somewhere is going to protect you and you take advantage of the failure that you are suspecting will occur. But what you have now given out, even your own legitimate right to mobilize and get vote in the proper way. Because if you go to Section 62 of the Act, the way Section 62(2) institutionalize this national electronic result depository, which has no relationship with the collation, right? Because it was written there as a distinct depository of electronic results. Right now, what they have done is even what the public is not asking for, but with a proviso. Because they have now made electronic transmission of results the basis for collation, and can only defer to the hard copy, the Form EC8A, where they claim to have a failure of, internet or what have you. So these are the kind of laws you made with tunnel visioning, and you wouldn't know what the outcome will be. And I think that, like Prof said, perception rate is already low, is going to result to a very high turnover because trust has been breached. And it takes us to the classical theories about legislators' behavior. The proponent of delegate theory, trust, and hybrid. How should the legislator behave in carrying out his or her responsibility? One, as a delegate, you are to reflect the wishes of your constituents. As a trustee, you are allowed to exercise minimal, decision making on your own, or a hybrid, which is recommended. In this case, where citizens are out on the street demanding exactly what they need to reflect in the most important leadership recruitment gateway, it's important that representatives reflect that, because that is the basis for democracy.
Right.
If we don't do that, then we are saying we don't even need the democratic symbol that is the legislature.
Okay. Dr. Amadi, I think this will probably be the last word, but we've established that this incident weakens the credibility of the National Assembly as a reform institution. Let me put this bluntly. Is Nigeria moving towards deeper electoral transparency or quietly stepping back from it based on what you've seen so far?
Nigeria is boldly and nonchalantly driving back, not even stepping. Okay, if you look at Venden, the world-rated Verity of Democracy from Sweden, it raised Nigeria, before 2023, Nigeria was what they called hybrid, which means you have democratic formalities, but the values are authoritarian. Nigeria is now rated as electoral autocracy. One step to full autocracy. So our elections are shambolic. We are more of an autocracy. Again, the blame should go not just to legislators, two principal culprits, INEC and the courts. Let's not forget. Now let's put it clear. The 2022 Electoral Act and the INEC regulation doesn't need to be amended. What they have done is suboptimal. First, that regulation, rightly, the theory about lawmaking is that you delegate technical work to agencies. So the National Assembly 2022 was right to say INEC decide the mode. That's the proper drafting methodology, because the dynamics, complexities are not what you grapple by legislators. So you make the big rule and give the agencies the regulations. Two, INEC made clear regulations, but INEC in their slow inefficiency could not, since 2014, gazette their regulation. As required by the Electoral Act, it must be gazetted. Secondly, INEC failed to carry out very clear provisions. For example, there are three modes of transmission. People make mistakes, they don't understand it, because they just don't read the law well. You transmit first to the IRF. IRF is for you to evaluate. You transmit to electronic collection center, then you transfer or transmit manually. We're written out. Now, what the law says, in a conflict between manual and electronic triumph in the Electoral Act, then in their clause 48, they say the mode in which you do that. And then in clause 93 or 94, it says, if there's neither this or that, INEC will use the result of the parties and the police and DSS. So the regulations has provided clarity on everything. What went wrong was a judicial mea culpa, if you like, where judges gratuitously failed the first fundamental of administrative law and said, oh, it's optional. Supreme Court, Iyan Gokoro, misdirected himself. And the difference between the legality of INEC regulation and the fact whether failure is substantive harm, different. I'm a professor of law, the dean of Ave Maria Law School, so I can say authoritatively. So the mistake is actually the inability to read the act well, INEC's extreme inefficiency and failure. The rules written by the likes of Okebano, who understand what they're doing, INEC failed. And then the courts put the status of that regulation into jeopardy. So today, what we have done, we don't need to amend anything. The Electoral Act and INEC regulation fit for purpose. What will come after this? Uncertainty, carelessness, but thankfully, I have discovered how we can even navigate what they thought was a blow. They have actually cleared the first crisis. So this is now legally recognized transmission mode. It falls back to INEC to do some creative work to restore back, to reduce the lens, the room for default. So we're going to define what is technical failure. It's INEC that would say, if INEC is willing to be trustworthy and efficient and honest, we can pass this great pitfall.
Very illuminating. And I'm glad both of you were here this evening. Dr. Sam Amadi, the director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought and a Rise News analyst, and Dr. Chibuzo Okereke, the legislative consultant and public policy analyst. Thank you very much.